Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I know the budgeting process is probably the least sexy thing that the legislature does. I mean, look, there are plenty of issues that it's much easier to have an opinion on because really, just need to get emotionally involved. But man, when it comes to crunching the numbers, that's where the details count. And unfortunately, that's also where a lot of people may be misled when a legislator says, "Hey, we're cutting spending," but it's easy to claim that, but do the numbers really back it up? Well, we're going to take a closer look at reining in Idaho's budget, particularly reining in some of the state spending, and why accountability and transparency is more important than ever.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. We've seen some very promising direction change in terms of the Idaho legislature taking on a little more conservative, and I mean more fiscally conservative nature as well. But the devil is in the details, and unfortunately, there are a few things that have to be closely looked at. And I'm just speaking for myself here, but most of us probably don't have the time or the inclination to sit down and go by it line by line and number by number and check it out and calculate, does it really add up? Thankfully, there are people who do so. And Fred Birnbaum, who is our legislative affairs director at the Idaho Freedom Foundation, is one of those individuals, and he's so good at what he does. So I'm going to share with you today an article that Fred has written about reining in the spending and how Idaho's budget numbers don't exactly tell us the whole story. And we'll break this down. I've got a couple of charts, but the charts, I'll encourage you to go online and check those out for yourself at idahofreedom.org. Fred talks about how for most conservatives, one of the most important issues right now is next to, stop bringing in illegals and stop, trying to bring people into the country, in violation of immigration law. But the next big thing on most people's radar screen would be stop the outrageous spending. That's true at the federal level. It's also true at the state level. Fred says, as we've pointed out before, Idaho's state appropriations have grown in parallel with the surge in federal spending, meaning that over the five prior fiscal years, ending with fiscal year 2025, appropriations have grown by more than 50% at the state and federal levels. So he asks, how did the 2025 session, which appropriated the budget for fiscal year 26, stack up? Well, preliminarily, it appears the end of double-digit growth has been reversed, maybe even cut in half. However, he says, take that with a grain of salt because there's some things that aren't so clear from the report. Here's the spending as reported by the Legislative Services Office. Now, I'm not going to break down this chart for you. I will tell you if you go to idahofreedom.org, you will find it right there, front and center. It's an easy enough one to find. But I want you to hear why Fred says, we need to break this down somewhat. He says it appears that overall funds spending only increased 1.5% from the prior year. However, Fred says, note that while general fund spending for education, public safety, and the general government has increased by 6.8%, dedicated funds for things like roads, bridges, and dedicated agencies like Fish and Game have decreased by 14.6%. So what's going on? Well, he says what's happened is that over the last couple of years, additional budget items have been moved off the books and classified as continuously appropriated funds. And what that means is they're not in the above reported spending categories. So this is why you have to dig a little bit deeper. In fact, he says, here's a direct quote from the Budget Going Home packet sent out on April 4th by the Legislative Services Office, or LSO. Budget and Policy Analysis Group removed the direct appropriation for the School District Facilities Fund and made this distribution continuously appropriated or off budget with passage of HB 304 and HB 481. So the fiscal year 2026 estimated distributions, $246,450,000 or $105,520,700 more than was distributed in the current year. Are you following that? By taking those things off books, suddenly the numbers can look much better, but not actually reflect the actual spending. And here's what Fred asks you to consider. What's unclear is the exact amount taken off budget total or budget overall for fiscal year 26 and for fiscal year 25 for that matter. Now he says Idaho Freedom Foundation sent over the following public records request to the Legislative Services Office Quote, I would like to please request all records showing the dollar amounts and agencies that continuously appropriated funds in fiscal years 2024, 25, and 26. These are funds that are not counted in original all funds appropriations for which state or federal dollars were continuously appropriated. So how much money is there really being appropriated that isn't necessarily on the books as well as what is on the books? And this is the response that IFF got back from the LSO. Good morning. After reviewing your request, LSO has no responsive documents. I suggest contacting the state controller's office. They may be able to help. If it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, that it sounds to me like they ducked. I think they ducked that one in spectacular fashion. Now, Fred says this is a very puzzling response because previously the Legislative Services Office calculated the amount for some of the continuously appropriated funds in the budget going home packet. So at this point, he says, we can only estimate the changes in spending based on information we've obtained through conversations, but it's just a best guess at this point. And again, this chart and the others that go with this can be found at idahofreedom.org. So let's talk about why this matters. Fred says, what we see is that overall spending grew about 4.8%, but we can't be sure. This is a placeholder till we get better cooperation from state agencies. Moving spending to the continuously appropriated category may have some merit for long-term projects, but it's just not tolerable to lose visibility of these funds. After all, it is still spending. It's taxpayer money, after all, so they should get to see it in official documents on spending. Spot on, right on the nose there. So, Fred says, as we stated, our analysis is incomplete at this point, but here are some of the positives that we have as this budget is finalized and moving forward. First of all, he says, Idahoans should thank the many legislators who stood tall in reining in spending growth. Now, this includes legislators who made a pledge to reject appropriations that added headcount or grabbed more debt-financed federal dollars or other new spending beyond what was needed to replace vehicles and other items that wear out. And there were also members of the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, or JFAC, who fought tirelessly to squeeze budgets. Now, that was a difficult task given that the majority of JFAC members view their role largely as giving agencies what they want. But he says, as we acknowledge the difficult position that the JFAC co-chairs were in, given the composition of the committee, they should be thanked for encouraging vigorous debate. So that's a positive moving forward. But by the end of the session, 15 appropriations bills failed either on the House or Senate floors. Now, most of those were rejected due to the excessive number of new requests for ongoing spending. But Fred says, while we don't know the total impact of killing these bills due to the lack of clarity on continuous appropriations, it appears that these bill rejections reduced the governor's general fund request by over $30 million. Now, while that's small in the context of a $14 billion plus appropriation, it was certainly better than rubber stamping the governor's request, rather. Trimming spending, he says, is a Herculean task at any level of government. This is why Congress doesn't seem to be able to do it. And it's our hope that the 2025 session sets the stage for an increased focus on spending next session and that Idaho can lead the way on fiscal conservatism. So it's a mix of news, right? A little good news, a little bit of bad news. But really, you wouldn't know that unless you were one of those diehard people who really reads every single letter, every digit of every bill. And I'll be the first to admit, when it comes to the budget and the appropriations bills, it's like, oh, okay. I want to find something that's a little more interesting, a little more animated. But thank goodness for Fred and the other wonderful analysts who take the time to crunch these numbers and then give, some cohesive commentary and analysis for those of us who otherwise, are maybe not so good with the numbers or not so interested in the inner workings of the budgetary process. I do agree. It's way past time for the spending to be reined in. And at the same time, when money goes off the books, if the continuous appropriations, that doesn't sound like a very good idea because it seems to me that's a powerful incentive for various government agencies or government programs to find a way to move their money off the books so that it can more or less take place in the dark. Never a good idea when it comes to the use of taxpayer funds. The taxpayers deserve to know. And frankly, even if you're not deep into the budgeting process, it's just good to know what your government is up to. After all, they're using money obtained from you and me in order to accomplish what they're doing. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing